This is a show where we get you all that you need to know about India's fight against COVID-19 pandemic. Well, Britain has become the first country in the world to approve COVID-19 vaccine for use. It has said that Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine will be rolled out from early next week. The news of the vaccine itself marks a huge success against our fight against the pandemic that has claimed nearly 1.5 million people worldwide. But it also brings us to an important question of whether each of us needs a vaccine or not. The Union Health Ministry in its latest presser discounted the need to vaccinate everyone, stressing that government never spoke about vaccinating everyone against COVID. Health Secretary Rajesh Bhushan said that it's important to discuss such scientific issues based on factual information only. Whereas Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, or the ICMR, Balram Bhargav, too, said that if a critical mass of people have been vaccinated, the chain of virus transmission is broken, then we may not need to vaccinate the entire population. Well, to understand further that what issues involve in vaccination and the factors that will determine the need to vaccinate every individual, we are joined with a panelist of very three eminent guests. Dr. Samiran Panda, he is scientist and head EST division of ICMR. Dr. Rohit Sareen, member National Task Force for COVID-19, and Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary, head Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine from PGIMS Rohtak. Well, thanks all three of you for joining us. Let me start with you, Dr. Rohit Sareen, member National Task Force for COVID-19. Sir, first up, how do you see Britain's announcement of having, or to say, a successful COVID-19 vaccine which will be rolled out from early next week? Sir, the first breakthrough.
Well, I would say that it is a really very happy moment for all health professionals and societies at large globally.
Right.
That yes, one country has taken the initiative to adopt a vaccine which has claimed to be over 95% successful. But time will tell what is the outcome. What is the success story when the same vaccine is delivered in a larger population in the community at large? And of course, in the Indian context, if we talk about the same vaccine which is manufactured by Pfizer, probably it will not be easy for us because, we don't have that cold chain at minus 70 degrees where this vaccine needs to be preserved.
Right.
And in the absence of that, I would say that Indian people would definitely require something which is more feasible and practical linked to our country context. We have a very good vaccination program, but in that vaccination program, the cold chain is maintained mainly at 2 to 8 degrees, and therefore a vaccine which is stable at these temperatures would be the preferred option. And I would say that studies are on within the country on vaccines which would fulfill this criteria.
Right.
Efficacy-wise, well, there could be a little different from what Pfizer has claimed, but then its applicability in the country context is probably more important for us in India.
Right. Let me go off to Dr. Samiran Panda from ICMR. Sir, if you're able to hear me, and there is a moot question we've been hearing since quite a few days, that whether all of us, like each and every individual of a given country, whether they need to be vaccinated or not. Is it true, sir? Or we can't discount that possibility? Dr. Samiran Panda.
Well, this is a very important question, and it's a question of public health importance. Who needs the vaccine? If we pose this question, those who need it should get it. Okay. And then, naturally, the immediate question which follows, does everybody in a country need it? The other side of this question is, does everybody in a country carry with them the same risk of acquiring the infection, or is everybody in the country equally vulnerable? So the susceptibility or the vulnerability or the risk of acquiring infection, is it homogeneously distributed across the country? The answer is clearly no.
Right.
Because if we look into the epidemiology of SARS-CoV-2 infection in the country, India has very recently completed its second national sero survey, which clearly shows that the prevalence of exposure to infection, as indicated by the presence of antibody, in urban slum dwellers or slum dwelling population is 16%. Whereas if one moves to the urban non-slum setting, the seroprevalence is 8%. And if one goes farther to the periphery, in rural setting, the seroprevalence is 4%. Very clearly, this national sero survey indicates that the population density, of course, increases the chance of transmission when an infected individual, that person be symptomatic or without symptoms, is able to transmit the infection to the susceptible population around him or her, whom he or she interacts with in or during social interactions. And if the prevention measures are not taken up to the extent as desirable. So the point I'm trying to make is that the vulnerability to infection differs not only in terms of population density, but also in terms of the mixing which is happening between the infected individuals and the susceptible population. So in a country like India, as vast as India, and given that the National Sero Survey has indicated that the spread of infection is not homogeneous, we have every reason to believe that vaccination also needs to follow this whole epidemiologic scenario. And that's not only true for SARS-CoV-2. Let me remind ourselves that during smallpox pandemic, that was also a pandemic, the vaccination, of course, there was a talk about mass vaccination, but quickly it occurred to the public health experts and the physicians that what would help us to win over smallpox is surveillance and containment. And how do we achieve the containment? By vaccinating the near and dear ones and the locality through ring vaccination. So if a person is having skin rashes of smallpox, characteristics of the smallpox, his family members, neighborhood, and the village or marketplaces that he would visit was vaccinated. So it was not the mass vaccination through which we could handle smallpox. Same or similar approach would be required here, because SARS-CoV-2 also spreads through certain factors which are not homogeneously present all over. So I would say not the mass vaccination, but smart vaccination is what is required.
Right. Well, thanks, Dr. Panda, for this elaborate explanation. Now, on a cue, let me go to Dr. Rohit Sareen. And you being a member of National Task Force, sir, if we actually arrive at possibility of discounting population that doesn't require COVID vaccine, now I'm asking a hypothetical question here, how will the logistics play out, considering Dr. Panda just explained like in amazing details as to like each individual varies in terms of the immunity and certain factors that makes them to have vaccine or can discount the vaccine. So will there be a massive logistic challenge as well once we are ready with the vaccine?
I would say that whatever Dr. Pandey has said in the context of smallpox, we have to take it in the sense in which it is stated, and it's not the absolute truth. I mean, because this particular virus and the protecting antibodies to the virus, they are behaving in a very different way. In smallpox, we were always saying that, okay, once you've got the vaccination and if you are immune, you don't need to get any further vaccination again. You are immune for long. But in this particular viral infection, the same thing is not happening. the antibodies tend to go away after a particular period of time, and it may not even last beyond 6 months. So to differentiate on this basis that whether an individual has antibodies or does not have antibodies, today one may have antibodies, but after 6 months you may not have antibodies. So then again you become vulnerable. So
Right.
this is just a general way of saying that, well, vaccination is required for basically everyone. However, we have to prioritize based on the vulnerability, based
Right.
on the fact
Right.
that what is the place of that individual within the society. Now, for example, if it's a health personnel who is dealing day in and day out with
Right.
COVID
Absolutely.
patients and
Absolutely.
diagnosing and treating them, he has a greater chance of developing COVID infection. So therefore, the health personnel would be obviously be given the first priority. So like that, Government of India has prioritized groups in which the vaccine would be given. Security personnel are there, people involved in transportation are there, things like that is already defined. And then there are the elderly who have a greater chance of death due to this particular viral infection. There are people with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, chronic lung disease, who are again at a higher risk of mortality.
Right.
So individuals who are going to have these risk factors will definitely be given the priority over others who are healthy young adults. So, but that doesn't mean that the young adult today does not require the vaccine. Only thing is that he'll be a bit behind in the queue for getting the vaccine.
Right.
And the reason for that is that, you see, the logistics, as you put it, they are not fully sufficient to reach everyone at the same time. It is a process in such a huge population, 1.3 billion population. It's a process. And within the process, one will have to lay down guidelines. But I would say that over a period of time, maybe if it may take even a year, but over a period of time, virtually
Everyone,
most
you mean
of
to
the
say.
people will be vaccinated.
Right. Well, Dr. Panda, our question was based on the latest presser that was conducted by the Health Ministry, and DG of ICMR, Dr. Balram Bhargava, was also present over there. So he mentioned about the possibility of not vaccinating everyone based on the understanding that once they're able to vaccinate a large number of population, and that, of course, will mitigate the chances of spread, and then the vaccination will not be required. So would there be is there a sort of a study that needs to be conducted once we have a vaccine on whether and how much transmission it's blocking?
Okay, now taking it farther from what Dr. Sarin said, let's think of this situation. You have a certain amount of doses in hand. A country has that, be it one vaccine or two. And then we have prioritized groups due to the occupational exposure. Now, once the priority groups are covered and we move on to the other groups who are interfacing with these groups who have the highest vulnerability. So it's all about the proportion of immune individual vis-a-vis the susceptible population. For any infectious disease to sustain in terms of they being able to transmit or get transmitted from one individual to more than one individual, one would require a reproduction rate or number, or we call it again effective reproduction number for the organism. So the more we vaccinate people or the people become immune, then the susceptible population, the number of it or the proportion of it comes down. The second point, what I would like to highlight, following any vaccination, three things matter. One is safety. Of course, most of the vaccines are being tested for their safety in phase 1 trial. And then the immunogenicity or the efficacy, how effective are they? And the third thing is about the memory. And if we remember that for the flu vaccine, we get a protection for an year or so, and due to the change or the mutation of the virus, we need to change the composition of the vaccine. However, if we vaccinate sufficient proportion of people, that the intermixing between the infected and the susceptible becomes lesser and lesser in terms of ability of the organism to spread from one to more than one, then the epidemic situation would not sustain.
Right.
So the point I'm trying to make is that it's quite possible to arrive at a situation when everybody is not vaccinated, but quite a proportion is vaccinated, but the chain of transmission stops because the virus is not finding anybody whom it could go to and infect. Of course, there are people in the whole society who are yet not vaccinated, but the virus needs to go. Virus needs to have that opportunity to go from an infected individual to a suspected individual or more than one suspected individual. So that's exactly what happens when a critical mass in a society is vaccinated. So it's all about the proportion, relative proportion between the infected individuals, the susceptible individuals, and the transmission conducive environment. What vaccination does, not through natural infection, I'm talking about immunity or the herd immunity, that term, through vaccination. What it does, it creates a barrier between the infected individuals and the suspected individuals. So although there is suspected individual in the society, they are really not able to come close to the infected individuals because in between there are a whole lot of immune individuals, and we have an effective vaccine,
Dr.
playing their roles there.
Just stay on, Dr.
Of course,
Samir
we
Panda.
do not know what will be the memory of the immunity.
Right, Dr. Samir Panda, just stay on. Let me go off to Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary. I apologize, sir, you've been waiting for long. There was some technical issue, but if you're able to get you now. Sir, let me just, basically, we are discussing as to how, if based on the statements made by the ICMR chief and the union ministry, that if we are able to vaccinate the critical mass, there will be a possibility of breaking the chain of transmission, and then perhaps we do not need to vaccinate everybody. Now, given the vast amount of study which has been done on this virus, so will it be possible to contain the pandemic if we are able to vaccinate, as we say, the critical mass of people, or let me just ask a very, a very preliminary academic question, that is it possible to even break a chain of this virus, given its extent?
Yeah, that's the hope we are having from this vaccine. But remember one thing, as Dr. Panda has explained very exclusively, in a very detailed manner, how it can work. Now, the question is, which nobody knows, what is that critical number? Some talks about 60%, another talks about 70%, depending upon the reproductive rate which he talked about it. From an individual perspective, my requirement will be, or as a physician will be, though we talk about herd immunity, whether